Good morning. Today we will be discussing, as the presentation says, differing expectations and different experiences around community monitoring. We have been seeing community monitoring in the last decade or so becoming very, very important as a development tool. And in the short presentation, we will try to see how different people have been looking at community monitoring and what COPASA would like to see in this particular field. Some of the confusions I have tried to summarize here. First, of course, is what I'm calling what is in the name. In India, often we call it community monitoring. We also call it community-based monitoring and planning. Some people refer to this entire sort of body of practice as social accountability, and sometimes the term social audit is also used for the same thing. So, are these terms the same? Is there anything different around these various terms? Let's try to do some exploration there. Then the second issue is when we talk about social accountability, we find often these terms being used. Number one is to bridge the demand-supply gap to increase efficiency of public service delivery. Often we hear the term reduce corruption, and of course in COPASA we have been talking about increasing citizenship. We would like to explore what these three things mean, what are the distinctions, and finally some discussion on various tools, because I have found oftentimes people say, let us do a citizen's quota, let us do a social audit, and I don't understand what they mean. Is the tool more important? Is the method more important? We will be trying to talk about this. And finally, we will be exploring these theoretical issues in the context of what is happening in India around NRHM, and also try to find some directions for all of us in terms of where do we want to go, what do we see as our signs of success when we are engaged in community monitoring. The first question, what is in a name? Now, if we want to understand the distinctions between the names, I think we have to get some clarity as to what, as practitioners, as people who are the primary sort of facilitators of this process. Community is the primary actor, but our role is very important because we are the primary facilitators of this process. What is our conceptual framework about the role of the community? What is our conceptual framework about our roles, or let us say the role of the third party? How important do we see that be? And finally, how important do we see the dynamic tension between accountability and planning? Oftentimes I have heard it being said that accountability itself cannot happen, it has to be followed by planning. Now, I can make a conceptual difference there, in the sense that the judicial system is involved in accountability, but judicial system actually is not involved in planning. The planning is done by the executive branch. For planning, you need assessment, you necessarily do not require accountability. So, we can talk about these also. Accountability, but judicial system actually is not involved in planning. The planning is done by the executive branch. For planning, you need assessment, you necessarily do not require accountability. So, we can talk about these also. Now, in order to understand the primary basis of accountability, this is a very simple sort of mathematical equation which says that accountability or social accountability requires two primary conditions. The first primary condition is a condition which is based on community, which is being mentioned in this case as voice, and I'll come to voice what it actually means. And the second is the issue of compact. What does voice mean? Voice means a situation where the citizen or the community or the people who are the intended objects of public service, whose lives are supposed to improve, they have a strong articulation of what their needs are, they have a strong articulation of what their experiences are, they have a strong articulation of what they expect from public service. So that is the voice. The community, how strong it is, how well it is able to articulate its need and demand. The second is the issue of compact. Now, without compact, accountability is very difficult. Compact is an agreement between the state and its subjects. I'm using the word subject now in a very clear intention. I will slowly move from issue of subject to citizen as to what the state agrees are the entitlements, are the rights, are the things that the citizen or the subject can expect from the state. That has to be clearly articulated. Because the more vague or fuzzy or inexact that is, it is difficult to make an accountability claim. When you have a clear articulation of what the state says that it will do in terms of public service delivery, it is easy to measure this public service provision against that articulated intent. And then that is part of social accountability, because social accountability takes place in the social domain, it doesn't take place in the legal domain, which is legal accountability, or probably in the domain of legislation, which is often called legislative accountability. Other people are seeing it in this framework in which they see citizenship as the core, which defines what they get, and accountability being strengthened by rights and resources. If there are no resources, the state cannot actually have the conditions to provide the services. For example, I will take JSY as an example. You want JSY or institutional delivery all across India. But are there resources to provide good services in terms of human beings, materials, beds all across the country? It is not there. In terms of rights, is there an articulated right that women have the right to safe delivery? So if anything goes wrong, they have a space where they make a complaint and get some kind of redress or recompense. So accountability requires both rights or the ability to make a claim and resources which will enable the state to provide the necessary services. So just to summarize, one important thing that is being mentioned is the issue of citizenship and voice. And for us in COPASA, for us who come with a very clear community perspective, the issue of citizenship and voice is extremely important. Because, I mentioned this, because you can have a very facilitator-driven process. The facilitator can drive a very, very elaborate data-driven process. For example, many of you may have heard of a tool, and I'm coming to tools here, a tool called the Citizen Scorecard. Citizen Scorecard is a methodology which was pioneered in India, in Bangalore, by a group called Public Affairs Committee or Public Affairs Foundation. What does it do? It has been doing Citizen Scorecard across different countries, across different cities, sponsored by World Bank, sponsored by, even once in Delhi by Sheila Dikshit. What do? They essentially look at public services like, let's say, water supply, street lighting, public works department, and they do a statistically robust survey. The moment they go into a statistically robust survey, it becomes extremely facilitator-centered. So the facilitator group, which is the Public Affairs Foundation, I have nothing against Public Affairs Foundation, I'm just giving you a story of their methodology. They design a survey, they go out and implement the survey in the standard survey methodology, keeping all the rigor intact. and then they do an analysis, which is statistical, and the report is called the citizen report card. So what is the citizen report card? Where is the participation of the citizen in the preparation of the report card? The citizen is primarily the respondent. What is the citizen's experience is being assessed from the perspective of the government. Like Sheila Dixit had commissioned PAC or PAF to conduct a citizen's scorecard on Delhi municipal services. They have done it in Bangalore, that is where they come from. So they've done it on behalf of the Bangalore municipality for the Bangalore municipal services. So the report card is then shared in a public platform where citizens are also there, municipal services are also there, but you can also share it without the citizens being present, and then the municipality sees what is my report card. So the municipality receives feedback about its performance. So the role of the citizen there is in terms of being a passive giver of experience of the use of public services. Now let us look at the community-based report card that is being done in, or scorecard as terms get confusing, that is being done through the NRHM process. There we are trying to see that the data collection becomes as simple as possible so that it can be done by as close to the community. Let us say if a non-literate cannot do it, it can be done by somebody who has minimum literacy skills, ability to add 2 digits. That's what we were saying. It does not require a calculator. It requires simple question answer or simple group discussion. So the methods are less rigorous, the methods are simplified so the community can participate in the process of inquiry itself. So the role of the community between the more statistically rigorous method and the simplified method is how do we perceive the role of the facilitator vis-a-vis the role of the community. So this is something that we have to be extremely careful. And because different people are looking at community monitoring or social accountability depending upon their perspective, how facilitator-centered is it, how simple and community-centered is it. If it is facility-centered, like the Public Affairs Foundation methodology, the methodology is so rigorous that the methodology itself becomes the most important part. So we are going to do a citizen report card. World Bank often says, do citizens report cards. So what do they mean? A CRC actually means adopting the PAC methodology to assess public services. And if you go to this CRC, if you do a Google, you'll actually find CRC now has a small R on top of it, meaning it has become a registered kind of trademark, and they do courses, including online courses, to train people to do CRC across the world. So what I'm trying to say is that is also one way in which public services, CRC can be done on health, CRC can be done on judicial systems, they've done special methodologies or special questionnaires to assess different kinds of public services. So that's one way of looking at CRC or looking at social accountability. But in that method, how important is the notion of voice? Compact, yes, because the compact or the state's agreement on schemes, the state's agreement on public programs, the state's agreement on what is the legal situation, that is important because from that the questionnaire is derived. But the participation of the citizen does not have any concept of voice. So this is what I want to highlight in this particular thing. Now the issue of, I've already mentioned that much of social accountability success requires at the end of the exercise some improvement to take place. Because the community with whom we are working, they require tangible benefits. If they do not receive tangible benefits, which is the last point, remedies, non-repetition and compensation, then their interest in participating in this process, because we want more intensive citizen participation. We want the citizens to be owners of this process. If they don't get any benefit, if they are not sufficiently energized through benefit, then their energy levels will come down. So that is also an important consideration that we have to keep in mind. However, if it is a facilitator-driven process, you can continue to do it. Because the energy is required by the facilitator. The energy is not required in the citizen. Another way to identify tools, and here I have kept a few tools on one axis, is to understand what is it that you want to, what conditions are met. Like let us say we want to do social audit or budget tracking. Social audit means a particular, sometimes it's meant as the overall methodology, but if you come down to social audit as a method, social audit implies that there is a process in which the people are reviewing public data. People are reviewing data to see whether the government data and documentation reflects community experience and situation. And as we all know, social audit was received its impetus from the Mazdoor Kisan Shakti Sangatana work around Panchayati Raj entitlements. But social audit and budget tracking require a lot of information availability. Without information, you cannot do social audit. If you don't, right to information came because the data was not available. However, if you want to do a community scorecard, you don't need so much of government data availability. You need probably citizenship and voice. Whereas for citizen report card, the facilitator needs to be the most strong. So depending upon what you want to actually see, where is the nature of the gap? Is it a budgetary gap? Is it an efficiency gap? Is it a lowest level service delivery gap? In order to understand that, this matrix may be helpful for us to find the appropriate tool. What I want to say is tool is subordinate to the conditions under which the exercise is going to be done. So you cannot start, like many of I have received international organizations requesting me, can you do X in a particular place? My answer is, I don't know whether X is appropriate or Y is appropriate. Who is the group? What is the situation of the group and its relationship with the community? What is the state of the community? What is the strength of the group? Has it ever done qualitative work? Is it primarily quantitative? Depending on all of this, you choose which is your appropriate method. Probably you need to do both, or one or two methods in order to get more robust, justification of the point that you want to make. So, very clearly, from our point of view, in terms of what we understand from the practitioner's perspective, is the tool has to be decided at a later stage. It depends on the nature of the gap, ability that we have, what do we want to finally achieve, the levels of data that is, or information that is available. Do we have a right to information law? Because if we have a right to information law, some of the data may be made available through the right to information law. But if you don't have it, sometimes you can't get that data. So depending upon all of that, the method use can vary. Now, again, I want to come back to the issue of citizenship and voice, because that is something which is extremely important for all of us. Citizenship is closely related to an earlier concept, which was participation. As development, sort of conceptually, the understanding of development has moved, the idea of what constitutes participation has also been redefined. If you see this large graph on the right, this tries to see how participation can vary from just consulting people to giving over the entire charge to people. So that's sometimes called the participation ladder or the steps of participation. Some other people have made the distinction, as I was saying, from being a passive beneficiary to an active citizen, from being users and choosers to makers and shapers. So basically what it means is how much agency or how much control and autonomy are we conceiving the community to have. The more we feel we are in charge and we are doing it for them, however we want them to participate, we are on the lower rungs. But I think in COPASA, our common dream is extremely autonomous, self-mobilized communities. We are also talking of the active citizenship. We are also talking of people who decide on their own destiny. So this active citizenship concept is very closely allied actually with the political formulation in which the whole community accountability is being implemented. And I want to come to the issue of, as I mentioned, citizenship and subject. Subject in Hindi, Praja. Citizen, Nagarik. But more than Nagarik, Nagarik just means in Hindi probably somebody who lives in a city. But that is not what we are talking about. Here, the issue of citizenship is the issue of democracy, the issue of citizens constituting the political formulation. And this transition happens through the nature of rights bestowed upon the individual. I won't say bestowed, but usually it is a constitution that bestows. Sometimes it's a struggle. People fight to get that right. So it's probably not bestowed, it's a claim. But rights are central. And an understanding that we are rights holders. Because what is happening in many of our countries is that we have long histories of monarchy, feudalism, subordinate experience. We have survived in long experience of subordinate experience, and in the last 50, 60, 70 years, a lot of the so-called global south is now becoming much more independent and nation states. However, the history of feudal relationships and particularly kinship relationships is strong and behind us. In India, we say votes take place according to caste. Vote takes place according to, and people ruling, or the parties also put up candidates. Why is that happening? Because we depend on the fact that people expect kinship rulers. Kinship relationships do not support accountability. Feudal relationships do not support accountability. Because there is already a relationship, as they say, of supplicant and patron. The subject is a supplicant. They are asking for services, asking for favors, and the patron is the one who is granting favors. In such a situation, you can't ask questions. You can only, through a vote, change the patron. But what we are talking about is through agency, voice, and influence, which is agency means to be able to exert your own desire, to mention it, to work according to it. Voice is to articulate it in a public platform, and influence is your voice is being heard and listened to because of certain other conditions, which could be the fact that you are many more and organized. And that leads to much more participatory democracy, where accountability relationships become important. And this is important because why is it that in some states in India it is getting some root, and in some states in India it is not getting any root? It is partly due to the state of the political relationship that people both expect. People do not expect, as I said, people are in a fatalism and subservient. So their natural state is not that of agency, claiming and demanding what we expect. So a lot of our work in community action and social accountability is probably creating that energy among people to move from fatalism and subservience to an act of agency and autonomy. So, construction of this active citizenship is central to the COPASA vision of accountability. It is not central to the vision of accountability for others who may look at accountability only to improve the efficiency of service delivery, only to reduce the corruption that is taking place and block the gaps by doing budget tracking, where the facilitator plays increasing roles. For us, because citizenship is central, we are constantly looking at ways through which the citizen takes a more active and commanding role or controlling role in the entire process. So, as I was saying, a very sort of brief and cryptic evolution of the nature of the state. While where are we located? In many places, like Tamil Nadu, things are not moving, but we have an efficient. Things are not moving on the community accountability front, but the state is very efficient. Probably it is in an autocratic bureaucracy. It's not classic autocracy, but the bureaucrat has taken the role of the local autocrat. The Mai Baap Sarkar. The Mai Baap is within a democracy, but a Mai Baap role. So we have to see where is the entire thing located. India, we are extremely lucky. We are in a, not only in a notional democracy, we are in an active democracy. So the possibilities of pushing that bottom-up pressure is extremely possible. It exists. But in other countries, even in South Asia, maybe the situation is not the same. But in India too, the situation is not the same across different states, even though we are in a democracy. So, the large question, why are we interested? And there are so many questions. Are we only in it for, as I said, a lot of donors are interested in it to improve program effectiveness, or let us say to increase aid effectiveness. Some want to reduce corruption. So here it is much more, the interest is part of the donor. Facilitators come in to create a methodology which gets the community experience of service delivery. But our interest is very much to empower the marginalized, to challenge the existing political relationships and formulations and decision makings in favor of the disempowered and the marginalized. So our vision is far more in terms of autonomy for the marginalized community. So what I'm trying to say here is probably there is an autonomy scale that we have to understand in which community or social accountability is being executed. Now, to move to the practice, and slowly I'll come to NRHM, is there are certain normative assumptions. If you have these situations, social accountability is possible. So the state has obligations, the citizen has entitlements, the obligations are created through necessary legislation, services, budget, and protection through violations, and the citizen entitlements are through a conscious, articulate citizen. They know about their rights, they are able to access services, and if they face problems, they are able to mention the problem, so the problem solving loop will work. Now this is normative. I remember very clearly a discussion in Geneva with sort of a very senior bureaucrat in WHO saying that why do people talk of such elaborate accountability measures in the South? Why is it necessary? In Europe, we never needed such elaborate accountability measures. So my answer was very simple. The level of citizenship awareness that you assume in Europe, the history of, let us say, the modern nation state and the relationship between the monarch, even if it is a monarch, and the citizen, has been defined through a couple of centuries. But here, in the global south, histories of feudalism are much more modern. So, to expect that the citizen will be able to make a claim in the case of any denial or, let us say, deficiency in service does not exist. So, basically, because the power difference is so high, we actually need much more accountability measures in the global south than in the global north. And when we come to health, the problem is even far worse. There is this unequal balance of relationship to start. The client is desperate, and when the person reaches the health system, it's not like education. Education is not an emergency service. It is an empowering service. It is a future benefiting service. But health is a we're talking about, and the balance becomes even more unequal. This is from where we have to think of accountability. We cannot think of accountability around what I call the normative assumptions. So we start with a situation where there is a huge disbalance because of health being a condition and the social marginalization, and our challenge is to see that it becomes equal, where the provider is also understanding duties and obligations, needs and entitlements. So one of the challenges around health-related accountability work at the lowest level is how to proceed without making it confrontational. Because if you make it too confrontational at the local level, the pre-existing power situation makes it such that the poor will be further deprived of their services. So it has to, even though it's accountability, the nature of health, because it is life-saving services, the issues of vulnerability, social vulnerability are so high, we have to see, and I think the experience shows that the kind of methodology that we are using actually may be, looking adversarial, but in essence, improve the trust level at the lowest level. Because until the trust level increases at the lower level, the service delivery and the demand or the needs matching will not take place. It moves into confrontation, the poor will be further victimized, and this is something that we have to keep in mind when we do our social accountability, that unknowingly, this is one of the ethical principles, that unknowingly we should not open up further options for victimization. So, what is the state, and as I was mentioning, this multi-layered options. Now, what do we want? Do we want an efficient state? Do we want an accountable state? The two can happen differently. We can have accountability without efficiency, and we can have efficiency without accountability. Idea is to get both together. But the history again of client-patron relationships, history of My-Baap Sarkar often comes in the way. And I mentioned Tamil Nadu as an example because Tamil Nadu is a highly efficient state. But it is extremely reluctant to listen to citizen feedback. Because the moment there is citizen feedback, it is seen as a challenge or a gap in its effectiveness. So this is something that we have to constantly negotiate. The other thing is, what is the Government of India's articulation in the Constitution, in the rules and laws and policies, and what the frontline worker thinks their obligations are completely different realities. The kind of, training, even the best, best intention may be working well because of their heart, not because they have a sense of duty and obligation from the Constitution. I don't think that any service provider is in an active state of duty, obligation, performance from the rules of conduct that sort of guide their work. They may be working out of being good human beings, genuinely concerned human beings, but that gap exists because there's also class issues involved there. And then the final point here that we are making is that the state's work around public services is also within a background of state's relationship with other institutions. which also impact health. So the state is not working as a health sort of service provider or empowerer in a vacuum. There is also the state working with the public sector, the state working on issues of market, and on one side, one hand of the state is saying GDP 9%, the other hand of the state saying human rights for the most marginalized. So there is a competing reality, a conflicting reality in which the state is also working. Now let me come to the issue of community monitoring in India and what happened after 2009. If you see this large range that I have made here, is what is the state today? In 2009, the Government of India experiment ended. NRHM started with community monitoring being one of its part of the implementation framework. The central government provided some funds. That experiment ended in March 2009. After that, we see there's a whole range of state experiences, despite the fact that the national government has been writing letters to all the states. So we have a state like Maharashtra, in which it continues in the same spirit, even though there have been small hiccups, but I will call them small hiccups, because in other states it has come to a grinding halt. So it has not moved at all. In some states it has started after some, only one or two. It's like Bihar being one state, where it has started after the pilot ended. But very strong persuasion from the same group that did the pilot. If that persuasion did not exist, probably Bihar would not have started it also. Reality is most states still don't have community monitoring. And in some states, even without the government endorsement, some amount of community monitoring is happening through non-governmental influence. Bihar has a double experience. I think Oxfam had supported some work around community monitoring in Bihar. Madhya Pradesh, since the government stopped, there was some independent action which led to some results, though the government is still wary of starting it, and they want to sanitize it by calling it MGCA. What's it called? MGCA, no? What's the full form?
Mentoring Group for Community Action.
Mentoring Group for Community Action, but all they're doing is doing ASHA trainings. So there's no substantive monitoring happening as yet. And so what I'm trying to say is that there's a whole range of activities which are happening, even though the normative conditions at the national level are the same. So to assume that if you put in the places, the budget, the laws and policies, things will automatically take place, does not hold true, especially in a country like India with a mixed centralized federal system. Here I'm trying to sort of look at two extremely divergent experiences, and we've heard both stories, so it's familiar with all of you, the Maharashtra and the UP. In Maharashtra, there is a very strong civil society stewardship. Without Saathi, I don't think the Maharashtra community monitoring can exist. In UP, there is also strong civil society, but the civil society in UP has very little relationship with the government efforts. Actually, the government is planning to do community monitoring, but it is planning to do it through its own secretariat. It is planning to do it through what the SPMU, State Program Management Unit, which is located in Bongo called SIFSA. So they do not see any managerial role for any NGO. They see finally civil society probably at the block and district level to do the implementation. So civil society is strong on both sides, but the roles are completely different. What has happened in UP is the entire thing has been driven through a bottom-up process, the little that it exists, through a Women's Health and Rights Collective, which is called the MSMU. Heard about it. In Maharashtra also there is a bottom-up collective, but it is not uniform in different districts. As Abhay said, that different state or district partners, block partners bring their own characteristics. Now they're doing it in a non-intensive manner. So there's a variety of experience because the state endorsement takes place. In UP, an interesting thing that has happened is that the local leadership focus has given interesting benefits in terms of, I don't know whether Sandhya talked about it, is many of the women leaders from MSM have actually entered electoral politics. They went into panchayat elections. I'm not talking about the experiences after that, but the relationship with power enabled them to take a new kind of power position. The other thing that has happened in UP, because it's bottom up, is that they have monitored things of their interest. So they've not only monitored health, they've monitored pension schemes, they've monitored ICDS, and every time they're monitoring a new service. Whereas because it's a government thing in Maharashtra, they have been able to expand the so-called issues, but it's a repetitive monitoring with a far more dialogic process with the public system. So the dialogue with the public system in the both are slightly different. Here it's government mandated, here the citizens go and sometimes make a claim which is heard, sometimes it is not heard. Some of the district partners have become members of the district PIP formulation process. So there have been some gains in that field as well. So, however, there are common challenges at the community level. We have mentioned issues of apathy and fatalism. In many places, maybe not so much in the UP and Maharashtra areas, but we did mention it yesterday when we were discussing Godda and Barwani, is this, if the services don't come into play, this interest of the citizen becomes extremely low. The second is, we were discussing also yesterday, is not all citizens or all people believe in the modern health system that the government is promoting. Their health belief system may also be different. Services may be extremely deficient because of much higher reasons than what is within the control of the community. So, to change systems or change health-seeking behavior through community action alone may not be possible in those situations. Privatization. And just to continue what I was mentioning about Jharkhand yesterday, is Jharkhand is one state where private delivery under JSY is higher than public delivery under JSY. One state in this country. What does it mean? The government is putting all its energies into one program, institutional delivery. Despite that, Jharkhand does not have adequate capacity in the public system to even take the pressure of institutional delivery. So in such a situation, what is the role of community monitoring? We were discussing yesterday, probably the role of community monitoring needs to move beyond public services, but then what do we look at? We have to look at probably what the state mandate is, and I don't know whether it moves from being an essential service to consumer service. So there is an issue of grey there. And finally, the issue, the community-authority relationship that we have mentioned here is we live in a situation of power dynamics. Health providers and community also have power dynamics. Can you complain if you are going to require the same service provider? How do you negotiate a complaint mechanism without attributing blame in such a way that face is not lost? Because the moment face is lost, meaning the provider becomes insulted or the provider becomes, in any way there is a loss of face, as they say, how does the relationship repair? Because the trust has to increase. So these are certain practical challenges that we have to face. Many of us have seen this in practice, and despite notional and normative conditions existing, these challenges are there. So what do we have? We have a situation where the guidelines exist, the official endorsements exist, the schools, everything exists. But despite everything existing, there are operational variations. The operational variations have to be understood in terms of the context and the endorsing authority, facilitator roles, the community capacity. This matrix needs to be understood. Just, in my understanding, just pushing the central government to give more endorsement to the state and state giving money to NGOs to do community monitoring may not necessarily lead to strengthening of citizen or social accountability. There are many more conditions that need to be met. However, even if there are no direct health system related benefits, can we find other spin-off effects? And here I'm sort of looking at some experts who said that social accountability can lead to benefits along 4 different parameters. And these may be together, but these may be separated as well. One is the notion of citizenship that we were talking about. So you may not get any benefits in health, but you may get strong benefits in terms of your citizen capacity, citizen agency, citizen's autonomy, citizen's voice. That may be a sufficiently important gain to be recognized in itself. Similarly, the issue of collectives. So not just individual autonomy, but collectives, solidarity groups. How effective does the VHSNC become? How effective does the self-help group participate in health-related discussions? So that collective solidarity empowerment is also a different and a specific gain of this process. The issue of accountability, of course, how responsive is the state? In many cases, we may not get high responsiveness because the state itself is sluggish, but in many cases you may get responsive state without, or changes in the state without so much of citizenship gain, because the facilitator itself is a strong agency. And then when we are talking of marginalization, when we are talking of social inclusion, the issue of inclusive societies. How much is the Dalit integrated into the community overall? Is the Brahmin Dalit collective negotiating together? Is the issue of social inclusion and exclusion being addressed by the communities that live together to demand for services? So this has been seen as a separate game, because there may be empowerment around common identified group. There may be solidarity among specific groups, but is cross marginalization empowerment taking place? Is solidarity taking place across groups? That is in itself a specific gain that can be gained from this process, and we should be tracking in many ways gains along all of this, because just a health-related improvement may not be a sufficient indicator that our social accountability process and citizenship and articulation process is successful. So some closing thoughts for us as practitioners. Where are we coming from? What is our focus? Are we in the efficiency, that demand, supply, outcome focus? Or, I think as COPASA, we are all very clear that our focus is very much in the citizenship paradigm. Now, when we are looking at the government and they are saying that they are interested in public accountability, what is their interest? Sometimes, is it really a political intent? Or is it because the international arena requires everybody to have social accountability? So it's become a fashion. So in many of the, let us say, donor beholden countries, they are putting it in because now the donor agencies require social accountability to be placed. Does it really mean that the government has internalized social accountability as a process of empowerment? Are we all talking the same language? Different aspirations, and I recall a particular situation where we were discussing community monitoring in health in the Planning Commission, and immediately the Secretary of Planning Commission said we should do it in the Maoist affected states, where service delivery is the poorest. You want to do social accountability? Will it work? So different people may have different aspirations from social accountability. Probably they were looking at a way in which the service delivery and the community gap can be reduced to the government's advantage. We are talking about providing effective health services to the poor and citizenship articulation. The government may be thinking about ticking a box in terms of its program deliverables. The program manager may be just ticking a box. So different people may have different expectations. And I want to introduce now the issue of governmentality. JNU people, governmentality, have you heard the term? Foucault. What does he say? Governmentality is all good intent finally being subverted through a kind of bureaucratic mindset which refuses to accommodate the political change that you're talking about. So they have ways and means to subvert the process through red tapeism at the lowest levels of bureaucracy. So the highest levels of government, you can get all your clearances, but when you go down to the level of implementation, the entire thing is completely muddled in bureaucracy and red tapeism. And finally, we are right now in the cusp of a political change. Yesterday, our friend Manmat had mentioned 0 to 0. Environment changes and our ability to work in the environment can also change rapidly. So the entire nature of this particular act, because it has many actors and many conditions, those can change. And something which was not possible yesterday can be possible today, and something which was possible yesterday can actually become completely impossible today just by the changing of one actor, probably an endorsing actor, or it can be subverted by very simple circumstances which are beyond our control. However, as community-based practitioners, what we look at, if you give the control and the autonomy, if you focus on the community aspiration part of it, the ability of other conditions changing the entire process becomes less and less. So if we move it from a facilitator-driven, government-endorsed to a community aspiration-based process, the ability of secondary factors affecting the entire process becomes reduced. So with that kind of assertion that community centrality is completely non-negotiable as far as we believe in community social accountability, I'll end today. Thank you.